Somewhere in the West there's a place where sound, soul and groove meet, where the music of new artists meets listeners like you, just like the ocean meeting the shore. We call that place the Groove Coast. And now, here are your hosts, John Celentano and Daryl Craig Harris.
Welcome, everybody, to the Groove Coast podcast with myself, Daryl Craig Harris, and my co-host, John Celentano. We're both in Las Vegas. Today, we have an awesome special guest and good friend, Fiona Ross. Fiona has a long history. She's basically you're coming from your home in North Greenwich, which is sometimes where I stay in London.
It is.
I'm there. So Fiona is a senior writer for Jazz in Europe magazine, guest editor for Jazz Quarterly, award-winning jazz vocalist, producer, music educator, founder of Women in Jazz Media, teacher of such notable singers as Rita Ora, Ed Sheeran. We're going to talk about all that stuff. How you doing, Fiona?
I'm fine, thank you. That sounded like an insanely long list. I'm like, do I do all that? I'm like, yeah, I guess I kind of do.
I actually could have went longer, but I kind of appreciated it.
It's terrible when people say to me, "Oh, so what do you do?" And I'm like, loads of stuff, because it's just too complicated. Because and also sounds a bit funny. Well, I'm this. It's just kind of, you know. We all have these kind of portfolio careers now. So,
well, I think all three of us are kind of the same. We all have 10 jobs.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So when someone says, "What do you do?" It's kind of like, yeah, I do some music stuff.
Yeah, you've had a really fun career. I mean, we've been friends now for I guess some years. And when I go to London, I usually stay with you at your house, and we have our awesome talks at night. So you started. You were actually kind of a theater kid, right? That's how you got your start.
Yeah, my mum was one of those kind of crazy stage mum types. In fact, I think there's an American documentary about exactly the type of person my mum was.
There's a few.
Yeah. So yeah, and I don't really know. I think because it kind of there's a lot of kind of creativity and artistic stuff in my family, but I think it kind of missed my mum and dad. So they always had a passion for it, but not what they did or wanted to do as a career. So I think as soon as I came along, it was like, right, this is what you're going to do. So yeah, I think my first job that I don't remember was when I was 2. I was modeling because I had this because I'm naturally ginger. Right. And I had like this massive kind of ginger hair. So it was a very kind of commercial
people notice you.
Look. Yeah. So I did loads of photo shoots and kind of radio stuff. And yeah, I was theatre trained. So yes, I've been doing this for a crazy long time. Makes me feel like a million years old, like really.
So something I've sort of, we were talking one night and you kind of just casually mentioned that you were in Annie in the West End. I guess that would have been the 70s, right? What year was it then?
I was born in the 70s. Well, hang on. So, I can't tell you how old I am. Now that
I would.
I was about to work out the year. I'm like, oh no, hang on. Yeah, I was 8 when I did Annie.
Wow. And I mean that, it's funny because you kind of casually mentioned that, but back in the day, that was a huge show, right? That was like a big deal.
Oh, it was, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It was technically my first lead role as such, because as I said, I trained in dance and drama and singing and all that kind of thing, and was doing all of it and very much raised in the, the theatre world, and that's what I was going to do. And normally there's, you start in chorus work and you kind of try and the dream is that you eventually work up to being the kind of the star.
It's funny. So you're already the star at 8 years old.
Well, yeah.
Like, now where do I go? Right?
Well, it's a weird thing, isn't it? Right. And also, and I talk to people quite a lot about this is, part of in the theatre world, in the chorus line is you have to be exactly the same. So you're trained to be exactly the same, but also stand out. Well,
I know. Yeah.
How do you do that? So it's a strange, funny world. But yes. But to be honest, I think it was just because I could sing a bit and I had ginger hair. So,
Well, you all, I mean, you're being modest, but I mean, I'm sure there must have been hundreds of kids that were up for that role. So,
and that's the thing. I remember this really well. The auditions I used to go to, my mum used to pat me off. And I think every day I was doing something and it kind of, piling up with all these kind of young girls and look this way and do this and say this. Right. And it was, it was the thing that you imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's only looking back as a grown up that I really can analyze the kind of what my life was like, because at the time I didn't know
just
any
doing your thing, right?
That's always what I've done, and people always say, well, what made you decide to do this? I'm like, well, I never actually made that decision. It's just it's what I've always done, and I didn't object, don't get me wrong, but I never actually made that decision.
Right.
So, yeah.
John Celentano.
Yes. So when you say there was no decision made, it was just there was never any backup plan, because when kids go into the arts, their parents are always, now look, this is fine, but just make sure you have some kind of fallback. There was none of that for you.
No, and I have to say it's really weird, and both my parents aren't with us anymore. I have so many questions kind of as an adult that I wish I could ask them.
Right.
Because both of, I mean, my family are mathematicians, so they were both mathematicians. My brother's a mathematician, so I am kind of the odd one out. So it's really curious when you think, well, why was this direction chosen for me? Because it was never an option. It was literally my career goal was to be a star. My mum wanted me to be the next Julie Andrews. That was her dream. Wow. And I never wanted to be the next Julie Andrews, because I was classically trained in kind of piano and singing. And I worked with the English National Opera for a bit. So I did do some opera, but it was never something I wanted to do.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, all those things are so competitive, right? Especially when you're young, you have these cattle call auditions and hundreds of people show up to get these roles.
Yeah, and and I think that's really shaped who I am now, because I think when I started doing my jazz thing, and there's this jazz artist and who are you? What I love about jazz in particular is that I'm just me, whatever it is. I haven't got to, I don't feel I haven't got to compete. I haven't got to be like this person. It's like, no, well, do you know what? This is me, take it or leave it. If you don't like my stuff, that's completely fine. Whereas in the theatre world, it's like, you've got to be like this. You've got to be this height. Right. You've got to have this hairstyle.
You're typed,
Yeah. And that's not me, although I was brought up, in that way.
Yeah, that's a lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was good. So your parents must have given you just this unconditional push, right? And support to do it.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, really, because I don't know where that came from, because they came from a very poor background. They're both kind of working class. My dad was the youngest of 15, lived in this tiny house in Scotland. And I've got all these crazy kind of Scottish relatives, and my mum's from kind of Newcastle-ish, so kind of up north as well, again, kind of, and her brother's was a lorry driver. So very different upbringings, and they made a lot of money. They worked extremely hard. And became quite wealthy, but they surely had that drive to kind of, you need an income, you need to make money. So it's kind of curious that that they didn't say, well, you need this as a backup, or you need this. It was just no, this is what you're doing.
If you're going to do it, you're going to do it, right? If you're going to pursue this, then you might as well go.
I was extremely fortunate, because most people I know, as you say, parents are not supportive, or kind of, well, all right, if you want to do it, but you have a backup job, or kind of have some other skills. That was never drilled into me at all. I mean, I went to kind of private schools, and I kind of had a very good education. But it was never that I might do something else. It's like, no, this is what you're doing.
It's interesting though that you're. No, go ahead. We can say this. Go ahead.
That's okay. I was going to say, what's great about your experience growing up, because you later on have gone on to be quite a teacher with a very well-known background in teaching. It's great that you have that experience as a young person, that you can impart those nuggets of your background and what to kind of help support students. Many have gone through that same thing where they didn't have the parental support, right? You know how that feels and how to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting that I find still hard to deal with is when young people don't know what they want to do. And it's a question that I know lots of kind of young people who don't have a career goal, or they don't know what they want to do. And it's something I can understand, but not really, because I never had that. This is what I want to do for a career, and this is or this is how I found my space. It's just what I've always done. And I speak to a lot of young people who are kind of like, well, I like to do a bit of this, but they haven't got that motivation and drive. And that's something I can understand it at a certain level, but also completely can't, just because it's nothing I've experienced.
Right. So as you said, you were very well educated. Then you ultimately you ended up Well, actually, what were some of the schools in later years that you went to for training? I know that's pretty prestigious schools.
I went to Arts Educational School, which is the equivalent to, I think, do you call it the High School of Performing Arts in New York, the FAME school?
Right.
It's pretty much the London one of those. So, and funny enough, it's where Julie Andrews was trained. And I remember I was 11.
I love Julie Andrews, by the way.
I know, well, you would have got on with my mum. And when we were looking at different schools to send me to, and I remember there was this one that to me looked really cool. And I really wanted to go there because basically you'd be in a class and then they'd suddenly whisk you off to an audition. So you might be in a math class or something. And there's like, oh no, there's a call for this kind of show. And they, take you out of class and you'd go. Which at the time I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. I want to do this. But my mum was like, no, you need a proper education, and we want those opportunities to be there, but you need to. The training is just as important. So she chose the Arts Educational because Julie Andrews went there, and in her mind, well, she's a well-educated, intelligent star, so that's where I should go. That's where I should go. But loads of famous people went there, like Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Oh wow!
Loads of names, but it's like the kind of the famous school in New York.
Yeah, well, that's my brother went to American Academy of Dramatic Arts in California, actually, and I used to play there. I used to play in the house band for the rehearsals, and the energy, like when you get in that environment with that kind of energy, where everybody's they're all like trying to make it, and they're all highly motivated. Not all of them, but most of them. That's such an intoxicating atmosphere, really. Yeah.
It's insane, and I'm still friends with quite a few people, and in fact, Adam, who I went there with, he was a guest vocalist on my last album, and it was really nice to kind of get back. So we quite often talk about that period of time, and it was insane, and it certainly wouldn't be allowed now. I mean, things like we did dance on tables. We would be in the dressing room walking around half naked and suddenly burst into some kind of cheesy school routine. And in fact, I remember Kids from Fame was a big thing at the time. I don't know if you know that TV series.
Oh yeah.
Well, that was huge. We loved that, and we would kind of work out all the choreography and be in the dressing room and do that. So there was lots of amazing stuff there, but also there was a lot of bad stuff. Kind of the well-being. We were
pressure,
weighed.
A lot of pressure. Yeah.
Well, and also we were weighed. The girls were. I don't think the guys were at the end of each week. And if you weren't a certain weight, then in the kind of where you had lunch, you were put on a special diet. You weren't allowed things. Lots of girls were anorexic. So yes, it was amazing, but also not.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit. John wanted to talk about that too, about you, because you have some emotional support groups, not only for performers, but there's a lot of pressure. I mean, we've all experienced that. There's a lot of pressure to make a living. I mean, I know women have a certain pressure in the arts, with, like you said, with weight and appearance. Maybe not so much for men, but it's still there. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I want to talk about also that you're a teacher and I always mess the name up, the British School of New Music. Is that
the British Academy of New Music?
See, I always mess it up.
I know, it's cool.
So tell us about that, because you had some very people that have gone on to become very famous, some students, and I know that was considered a premier school in the UK for performing arts also.
Yeah, I mean, I've been so fortunate with my teaching, and it's another thing that I just I fall into things, apart from kind of singing. Well,
it's kind preparation meets opportunity.
I just fall into things, and people are like, do you want to try this? And I can't say no to things at all. So I'm like, yeah, okay. But I'm always honest. I'm kind of like, well, I've not done this before. But yeah, teaching. And I started that when I was, now how old was I? Goodness. I think I was 16, and I was trying to make a bit of extra money on the side, and I was a piano accompanist for a classical ballet school. And one of the parents of the kids, and I say I was like, maybe I was 15 or 16, and one of the parents said, oh, do you teach? And I remember going, what? I'm a child. I was like, no, I don't teach. And they were like, oh no, I'd really love you to, it would just, show her a few things. And I'd completely laughed it off in a kind of like, that's ridiculous. And then a friend of mine said, well, pick up a bit of extra money, give it a go. And that's how I started teaching, and kind of, word spread. And I kind of ended up I think I had 50 private students at one point.
Wow.
For piano and singing, you know how word kind of gets out. But I realized that I did have a passion for helping people ultimately.
Right.
And then kind of, went to a college as a part-time tutor, and then ended up kind of head of the department, and long story short, ended up at the British Academy of New Music. But I think the variety of students, which is fascinating, because at the British Academy, which sounds prestigious and kind of all fancy, and you kind of say, well, Ed Sheeran went there, Rita Ora went there.
It is prestigious.
Well, it is, but you know what?
But it was part of your life, so I understand that too.
It is, but I think that the key thing about there is the kids that were there, and they were all over 16. The majority of these students were people who had no family support, no money, kind of very hard upbringing, and I had lots of students, for example, that were in gangs, and there was knife crime. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but the common thing they had was music. And maybe they weren't going to have a career in it, but that was the one thing that they had a passion for and that motivated them, and your Eds and Ritas and so on, they already had that.
Yeah.
They already had that thing. They didn't actually need.
Well, it's so, and it's so
really
important for young people. I mean, it happened. I mean, I think maybe with John too, but like for me, music sort of saved me in a way, because, I had a kind of a little bit of a tough family thing when I was younger, and I got, my self-confidence. I learned a lot of really great lessons from being a musician, from being in high school band and drum corps, all these other things that I did. And John, what's your thought on that? Like you kind of experienced that too, right? Although your dad's awesome too.
the only thing that when I was in school, the only thing that I gravitated toward, I was not a great student. Like from 1st to 6th grade, sure, it was great. But after that, I kind of lost interest in most subjects. And it was the arts that saved me when I got into high school. It was marching band first, and that kind of fell by the wayside, but theater after that. And the theater is kind of where, like a lot of kids, I found my spot and I found my tribe, right? And that propelled me through college. I went to a theater conservatory for college, but always played music and then studied privately. But that was where I kind of found my place. Yeah. And I could say, I suppose, for better or for worse, mostly for better, I think, because the lessons I learned, even though I didn't continue as an actor, the lessons I learned from that education, I take with me to everything I do. I find myself applying those lessons and those that background to everything now. So it really did carry through.
I mean, the skills you learn under the heading, if you like, of creative arts, whether it's a career thing or not, are incredible. Yeah, it is a powerful tool. Whether it's confidence, and whether you're just giving a presentation in an office, or whether you're reciting a monologue on the stage. Confidence is key, and community, and that's, I think, this from theatre work, that sense of belonging. Yeah, and that's incredibly important.
Yeah,
and committing
also
to whatever you're doing, committing to whatever the project is, or whatever your thing is,
discipline
to that and seeing it through. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's something I have to say, it does annoy me quite often. People outside of our industry think that kind of performing arts is all kind of frilly and kind of famous,
flighty, and
yeah. And it's like, do you know how hard we work? But the discipline, and I remember when I was little doing shows, and I remember being terrified of the directors, and that we all had to sit still, and if we said a word, you'd be thrown out. I mean, that was real, and is it that film? Is it Whiplash? Yes, Whiplash.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And I know people talk about that, but I'm sorry. But for me, that's true. I have been with people like that, so it is a hard industry, but the things it brings you are kind of incredible.
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk about so you becoming a writer, but also you were at the school for many years, and then you made a big decision, a big life-changing decision, to really go after your dream of being a jazz vocalist, composer. Tell us, how did that come about? I mean, obviously you were always doing that, but what made you make that final decision to sort of break the tie with the school and move on and do your own thing?
Well, yeah. So I'd always been doing, because I stopped my theatre work or kind of the performance side of things, because I had I had a son. I have 2 sons now, but kind of that took that made me change direction.
Yeah, and they're lovely. They're lovely guys too.
I love my babies.
Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, that forced me to kind of change direction. So rather than doing the kind of performance side, I was looking at more the behind the scenes. So working as a session musician, doing choreography, because of course it's all I could do. was I didn't think I had any other skills. So it was kind of, okay, how else can I earn an income and kind of do this, but without being on the stage and kind of being incredibly fit as a dancer and so on. So I've always been doing things like that, and as I say, the teaching. But the company, it changed owners, and I just wasn't, how do I say this professionally? I wasn't in agreement with where the direction they wanted to take the college in. I teach because I want to help, and I want to support, and I want to see kind of people achieve or believe they can achieve whatever it is they want to achieve.
Right.
It's, for me, you don't get into education to make money. There's better industries.
Yeah, there's a lot better ways to make money.
Yeah, it's like, that's not, so those discussions and a few other things, which is probably not right to really go into detail, but I decided it was the time for change. And so so I resigned.
Wow.
And I just resigned without a plan. And I do that. I think about things. So I don't act rashly, but once something's in my head, I'll give it a few days and then I'll do it or not do it. So I'd kind of made this decision on the Friday that, no, do you know what? I'm going to move on, and then thought about it. And then Monday I resigned. But yeah, I had no plan at all. And I think I was paid for kind of 3 months. So I kind of, I got 3 months to kind of sort out what I'm doing, and kind of, I suppose I should look for another job. And then someone said to me about a month afterwards, someone I used to work with said, so I take it you're doing your music now then? And I'm like, yes, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Honestly, because I didn't immediately leave to kind of go, right, this is what, and people say that, but yeah, I left because I was unhappy where I was. I had no plan. So for about a month, and he just said, well, I take it you're doing your music. And I'm like, yeah, do you know what? That's exactly what I should be doing. And then, so then I kind of, I'd already recorded an album, but I hadn't done anything with it. So I thought, well, do you know what? Let me release this while I work on another one. And take it from there, and then it all kind of it all went crazy.
Yeah, because your albums have all won a number of awards, especially this latest one. And how you have? I think you have 4 out currently.
I have 4. Yes, I have 4.
Yeah. And then these are all. I know you're co-producing with as a Jibby, your guitarist, right?
I produced all of them except the first one.
Oh, okay.
But I record at Jibby Studio. Right.
And that's something I told you when we first met after listening to your first album that I really love. I mean, the production is really neat. I get the feeling like I'm in a small jazz club in France and, the 30s. It's very intimate. The albums feel very organic. And me and John were actually just talking about that because he was checking it out too. And John, what were your thoughts about?
There's an immediacy to the sound. Like I was listening to this could be my favorite album title of all time, Fierce and Non-Compliant.
Thank you.
I adore that. And that record has such a great impact. It has a very impactful sound and an immediate sound. I'm assuming you all did it live in one room. Is that
No.
correct?
No,
Wow.
but thank you for your kind words. No, what I do, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm working on my next one, and I was thinking, well, should I do it the same as I always do it? And part of me was like, oh, I'd quite like to do something different. But then also I was like, but what I've done before has worked. No, I layer it up. So I record the drums first.
Okay.
So Marley, my drummer, will do the drums, for all the tracks completely on his own, and then Derek will come and do the bass. And then I build it up like that. And I love that process. And I don't know whether that's the composer part of me, thinking about different layers, but also the importance of each instrument, but no, I layer it all up. So it's quite interesting the way, and I know not many people do that.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that because it does sound like you're literally.
You wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
I would have guessed that it was all like I did. It was all in the room because it has this great live feel and energy to it. So that's a
good.
credit
No,
to
I'm
the
glad.
players and the production. Yeah.
I'm so, honestly, the musicians I work with, they're the most wonderful humans ever.
How did you? Because you actually, so the guys that are playing with you, and I've seen you in London. I guess now maybe a couple of times playing live. Pizza Express was one of them.
You took photos at one of the gigs, some fabulous photos.
Yeah, we've had a lot of creative fun. Actually, hopefully after the COVID thing, we'll get back to London, but
Yes.
and hang out. But how did you first put your band together? What was that process for you?
Gosh,
and they've all been with you a long time too, I should mention.
Yes. I'm trying to think. I think I've never really thought about that. There, Marley, my drummer, Gibby, guitarist, and Derek, my bassist, were my students. So they were all at the British Academy.
So no pressure for them.
I know. But
They're
I
still
think,
being graded after all this time.
I know, don't. Well, and the thing is, and Derek may or may not listen to this, and there's the funniest video when I did, I think my second album, we did an album launch, and I had someone doing some behind the scenes, and he was asking all my musicians, so what's it like working with V, and Derek said, I'm terrified of her. She scares the shit out of me. And then he burst into it and he said, but she's lovely too, but she scares the shit out of me.
But you know what? But you know what you're doing. Exactly. You know exactly what you're doing. So.
But it was funny because it was like, I'm not your teacher anymore, Derek.
Right.
So, but yeah, they're amazing guys. And I think, for me, whoever I work with, and I guess this ultimately is probably why I asked them to work with me, is they get it, but in the right way. They love the music. They are decent human beings, and they have the kind of same mindset as me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to explain that properly, and because I love what they all bring. They all bring something different to the table. So Gibby, for example, who is phenomenal, and he has many other projects. And in fact, Daryl, his Joseph Lawrence and the Garden project, and Ashani. I mean, Gibby. So it's his studio. He produces. He writes. I mean, he's a phenomenal talent. Hugely inspired by Prince. He's also Italian.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of influence. And then Marley has he loves jazz and reggae. So he brings these incredible influences. Derek is kind of more traditional jazz. He kind of knows all the jazz standards more. They all bring an incredible element. And I think that's the thing for me, why I talk about them so much, because yes, I write the stuff and yes, I arrange it. But for me, it's kind of how we all work together, and not just musically, just the vibe. We have so much fun.
Your band is too. Fun. It's a bit of a United Nations because you have influences from. I mean, where are the guys? I mean, I love that you have different influences. Where are the guys from? Are they all from London, or are they just from?
Well, they're all from London.
But...
Yeah, they're all from London, but yeah, they absolutely, kind of literally across the world. And again, of course, that wasn't intentional. But when you look back, because I've had people say to me, "Well, look at the diversity of your band," and I'm like,
for real, it's great.
But again, I love that organic thing, because it was just like, Marley, you're a great drummer. I'd love it if you'd work with me. And he was like, yes, Fee, I'm in. That was kind of that's how it happened. And then when you build it up, honestly, I love them to bits. I would be terrified if any of them ever said they couldn't work with me anymore, like truly.
Yeah, and I think all those guys, I mean, I know, well, you did a video with your bass player that actually went viral, right? It has quite a few, what was 100,000 views or something crazy, right?
Yeah, we did 2 part of the live sessions, because I love working with Derek, and obviously he does upright as well as electric, and it's kind of, for an acoustic thing, it works really well, just vocal and bass. And Derek, he's so good. Yeah, anything I ask him to do, he's there. I'll text him and go, "Oh, do you fancy recording?" He said, "Yes, when?"
Yeah, he's really sweet guy.
He's so lovely. So I was, because my vocals work really well in church environments, the acoustics. So I love the freedom of singing in places like that. So I kind of wanted to do a live recording. And it just worked really well with bass. So we did a couple of those, and I think on Facebook one of them got like 350,000 views. It was crazy.
Which is for jazz too, which is that's not the common thing. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What I like about your records too, like it's jazz, it's traditional jazz, but it's a really good mix. There's some Latin stuff. There's some people would say maybe almost world music. I love the diversity also of that. Tell us about the current project, your new record.
Well, I've just started working on my new album. What I've recently just done was this live sessions project. And with lockdown, so I recorded in March, which was just before the UK lockdown. It was literally three days before. And at the time, I just wanted to do some acoustic recordings, and we did 2 songs. So I had those, and I didn't do anything with them. And then we had this lockdown. And then in July, the studio that I rehearsed at opened up again. And it was like, thank goodness it's open. But of course, there's no venues, there's no gigs. Right. So it was amazing that the studio was opened, but it was kind of like, right, well, I need to do something. So I just kind of booked, the big room, the live room that they have in there. And I texted the guys and said, oh yeah, I've booked the studio. Do you want to get together and maybe we'll do some live stuff and film it or something? And they were like, we haven't played, since January. We're in.
I know exactly how that
Honestly, they were like, anything, So I was like, oh, great. And then kind of mentioned it to Warren, who he does a bit of percussion for me, but he's been doing the videos for me now. And again, actually one of my past students. And I said to him, I said, Arnie, I was thinking about recording something. And he's like, I'm in. And it became this massive project. So I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, okay, I want to make this really worthwhile for everybody, because we just want to play, so this wasn't about marketing for me or content for me or any of that. It was like, we just want to play. But I also thought, well, I may as well record it and do something with it. So I kind of, thought, well, let's just film it. And I chose the songs that I knew we all enjoyed playing, but for different reasons. So, for example, The Evidence Suggests, I know that that's one of Gibby's favorite songs to play on the guitar. Right. And you see it in his face in the video. You see it. It's like, that's why I chose that song.
Awesome.
So I chose songs that I knew everybody had a particular connection with, but also I didn't want to do too many slow, depressing things. Right. I thought I would just want to do some of the fun stuff. So I picked, I think it was 7 songs, and we had this epically long day. And it was really funny because we turned up and no one had played since January. And Lauren, who's my saxophonist, and Dave, who plays trumpet, they said, can we play them at least once through before we start recording? Because of course none of us had played. We were like, hang on,
see if I can remember how to play.
There's like lights everywhere and cameras, and we were like, oh, this would be great, and then suddenly it was like, oh shit, hang on a sec, you're filming this and you're going to release it, and it's like, could we at least play it through? And it was like, of course. But we just played everything once. So we played one song, then filmed it, one song, then filmed it, because I didn't want it to feel like a project. I just wanted to play. So I didn't want to get tied up in the stuff that you do if it was like a proper video shoot. I just want, let's play and let's film it and let's have fun. And then after that, so I had kind of those 7 songs, and then the 2 I did in the church in March. And my PR guy, Eric Alper, was messaging him, and he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I've actually got, 9 live videos that kind of, I was thinking, well, I can release one and then release another one. Keep me going for a bit while there's no gigs. And he said, well, why don't you just like release it as like a video album? And I was like, okay then. So in September, I released this kind of live sessions album, which has got all the live stuff. So that's the recent thing I did. Yeah. Sorry, I'm waffling. I could do that.
Yeah.
You tell me to shut up when you want.
No. I actually, that's part we want to know your story. I love the fact that those guys are great guys. They're great players. You can feel their energy, that they love playing with you live and also on the records. And like you said, like when somebody is playing stuff that they dig and your music is really fun, it's challenging, you can really feel that in the musicians. You can get that vibe, right?
It's so important. And that's one thing for me when I go and see performances, and I'm terrible for this, that if I don't get it, if I don't feel it right from the word go, then I'm gone. That immediate connection, it has to be real. And I think certainly from a vocalist point of view, and again, kind of with my training and training other people, there's so many singers out there that are pretending.
Right.
And maybe they
don't really know themselves yet.
You
can sense that. Right?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a criticism, but for me, I think for all my training in the theatre, and this, John, for if you trained in acting, you said, I think, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know that you spend all this time where you have to analyze yourself and do all that, and then pretty much forget that and completely become someone else. So there is a place for being someone else and pretending and all that, but for me in music, it has to be real. I want to see that is you. And that every word you're singing, I think that's a common thing in singing, that singers don't understand the words. It's like, you're telling me you're in love with this, or you love this. I said, but do you? I'm not sure.
Do you really mean it?
Do you really? So I'm terrible for that. So for me, it's about, it has to be real. And that's what I get with the amazing musicians I work with. They feel it, and you can see that. If they feel it, we will all feel it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome thing about you, and you bring that out in the guys. And I mean, obviously, I think that's part of where your teacher aspect comes in, because you know how to bring the best out of people. I don't want to call them students because they're not your students anymore.
No.
So tell us about so how we first met actually is through music, and then ultimately, excuse me, let me wipe my nose. So we actually met through music and mutual friends. And tell me about your writing, because you've become quite a well-known writer, journalist, and when I actually we did a live interview in London at Jimmy's studio, Facebook Live, and that actually led to me writing for Jazz in Europe. Although I'm nowhere near the writer that you are. I'm more of an interviewer, which is a little different. But so tell me about that journey. Like, did you always have a passion for writing, and how did that come about?
See, this is another example of how these things just happen. I'm just so fortunate that these opportunities come my way. So, no, I'd never thought about writing at all. I mean, I'd worked obviously in kind of academia, so I've done some of that kind of writing, but no, I'd never considered writing. And Nigel, the owner at Jazz in Europe, contacted me and kind of said, "Oh, yeah, if you thought about doing some reviews, I'd love you to do some reviews." And I was, I've never done that before. Look, I'm not a writer, I'm a musician. And he said, "No, that's what we'd quite like, is actually have a musician's point of view. So not, an academic or a kind of critic, or just, a musician." And I said, "Well, I'll give it a go." So I did a couple of CD reviews, and I thought, this I quite like doing this. And then they asked me to interview someone. And I particularly like that, because for me, I was finding out about that person, what they were doing, how they did it, and kind of that experience, and sharing their story with the world. And I sort of thought, actually, I really enjoy this. And as is my way, if I'm going to do something, I'm kind of like, I'm going to do it properly. So I wrote a list of people I thought would be cool to interview. And it was, to be honest, a list of people that I respected, and kind of like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? There was no other thought into it. It was just like, oh, here's my hero. So I wrote this list, and Steve Gadd was the first one on the list. So I did some research, tried to find, PR and so on, and just sent some emails. "Oh, hi, I'm a writer for Jazz in Europe." So I'd only done 3 articles at this point. "I'm a writer for Jazz in Europe. I'd love to interview Steve Gadd," right? And he replied, I got a reply, "Yeah, that would be great." And it's like, no, what? Seriously.
Isn't that, I know that's funny, right? When they actually respond, you go, "Oh."
I know, because I was like, no, look, it's me. I'm not. So,
it's Fifi from North Greenwich.
I know. I'm like, look, I don't think you don't really want me to interview you. And so I interviewed Steve Gadd. Sorry.
Was it him that replied, or was it his people?
Oh, no, it was his people that replied. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah, it was his people that replied.
No, it would have been wonderful either way.
Yeah. It was his people that replied. And so I had this amazing chat, but then suddenly I was like, I'm interviewing Steve Gadd. Oh my God. And I was also, the drummers I know, they're going to, like, if I don't do this right.
Exactly. No pressure.
Seriously, right? If I don't do this right, I will eat. So I messaged all the drummers that I was kind of friends with. I was texting, and I was just like, "I'm interviewing Steve Gadd. What would you ask him?" And they kind of laughed, and I had all these variety of questions, and I kind of took all of them on board.
It's actually really smart though, because it's like it's you admitting, like, "Hey, I don't know everything, and I don't know this specific thing."
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with someone like Steve Gadd. I mean, he is the drum legend, and I think of all the different instruments, I am quite connected with drums, and kind of I've spent a lot of time with drummers. That's another story. So I know
now you've opened up a Pandora's box.
Well, singers and drummers, it's a thing. Yeah. So I think I was comfortable that I knew quite a bit, but also that I knew what I didn't know. So I spoke to all the drummers and got all their feedback, and it was great. All the questions, I mean, some were silly and I didn't ask some of them, but and it was like, one of them was like, can I just kiss, just say, can I kiss you? It was like, come on. Steve Gadd, he is an absolute, a legend.
Yeah, and he's known to be a very nice guy too.
My goodness. Yeah. So I interviewed him, and he's the loveliest guy ever. And I think for me as an interviewer, and you hear all these stories about different personalities, and I'm thinking, well, Steve Gadd, he's up there. I wonder if he's going to be a bit of an asshole, or is he going to be a bit arrogant? You don't know.
You never know how that's
so I was ready. I was kind of thinking, right, but honestly, he was the loveliest guy ever. So I did this amazing interview, and then because he was playing at Ronnie Scott's that week as well, and then he said, do you want some tickets to come and see me at the show? And I was like, yeah, okay.
And we should just say that even getting tickets at Ronnie Scott's is like hard to do to begin with.
And Steve Gadd saying, do you want to come and see the show? And it's like, yeah. So I had these 2 tickets, and again I was like, well, I have to take my drummer.
Yes.
I'm like, I have to take. So I texted Marley, and I was like, I've got a free ticket. Do you want to meet Steve Gadd? And he's like, yes, Fee. And bless him, and it was the loveliest moment. And I think this is what I love about what I'm able to do with the platforms I have. So, the gig, of course, was amazing. We were at the bar at the back. And Marley was kind of like, transfixed, as we both were. And Steve Gadd came up to us at the end, and we chatted. And I said, look, forgive me, because you could sense these drummers everywhere. There was like, and I'm sure it's the same with bassists and everything. I could sense
the drum vibe was strong.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, there's a room full of drummers here, and they're all firstly wondering who I am talking to Steve Gadd, but also like, can you hurry up so we can, get a selfie? And I said to Steve, look, forgive me. I said, I brought my drummer with me. Please, may I introduce you? And he was like, of course you can. And they had the loveliest chat. But what I thought was really lovely was that you could tell with Steve, and this wasn't a negative at all, I was obviously a journalist. I was there to, he knew me as, not as a musician, not as a friend or colleague. I was an interviewer, but Marley was just a drummer.
Yeah.
And you could see this kind of
the brotherhood
mental. Yeah. Yeah. It was like, he shook his hand, and it was like, it was quite amazing. And they immediately started chatting about, kind of rhythms. And I can't remember exactly, because I stood away. I thought, well, this is their moment. But they were chatting away, and it was Steve that said, do you want a selfie? Do you want a photo? Because Marley wouldn't have asked,
right.
And Steve said, do you want a photo? And Marley was kind of like, oh, yeah, if you don't mind, and they've got this loveliest photo. That moment there, me being able to let that moment happen meant the world to me. And even in the memories on my photos, when it comes up, I kind of look at the photo of Marley and Steve, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah, and Marley is such a sweet guy, and he's a great drummer too.
Oh,
yeah.
He's amazing, and he like genuinely one of the kindest souls I think you'll ever meet.
Yeah. Well, one of the people that and John, don't let me hog all the time. But one of the great stories I know is you become friends with Maxine Gordon, right? And she lives in, which is Dexter Gordon's widow, right? And she lives in Paris. How did that first happen? I know it was through journalism, but.
Oh, but see, this is what I mean, is these things just happen. And people quite often think, well, you must have this plan. I have no plan. And I never plan ahead, and I hate it when people say, what's the 5-year plan? I'm like, I just want to live to tomorrow. Like, but yeah, Matt, so after I kind of interviewed Steve Gadd, I was like, oh, okay, right. So I'm doing serious interviews now. And that suddenly kind of made, I kind of stepped up a gear unintentionally.
Right.
And so I found Maxine Gordon online. So I'd not met her. I didn't really know much about her, but kind of, because I was given this Women in Jazz series on jazz in Europe, because I wanted to focus on kind of gender inequality and balance and so on. And I did some research. I'm like, this woman looks amazing. And again, I was like, well, I'll send an email, but I didn't think, that, she would reply or anything. But yes, she replied, and she said, yes, I'm just releasing a new book about Dexter. So yes, happy to interview, but I'm in Paris at the moment. I was like, I'll come to Paris.
Exactly. I mean, that's the great thing about being in London. That's not that far away, right?
Yeah, I was like, not a problem, because she spends used to, pre-COVID, she would spend about 4 months of each year in Paris. She goes there every year. But it's just the first interview, and still to this day, actually, that I've ever felt nervous about, because I did a bit more research, obviously, before I met her, and I'm like, this woman,
she's quite a force, right?
My goodness. I mean, so many different things, the experiences, her life. I mean, and when you talk to her, she'll go, well, Miles this and Ella this, and you kind of just, and it's not a kind of, well, it's honestly just, well, the other day, Miles came around.
She's not name dropping. That was just her life. Yeah,
exactly. So, that alone. And then also, she became a researcher, when she was writing this book about Dexter, she was like, I need to know more about researching. So she did like qualification, she studied. I mean, she's just phenomenal. So she was the first person I kind of actually felt nervous about, because I'm like, I can't fuck this up. I'm like, and I felt, I think in some ways I feel always unprepared, because there's always more that you could know, but I was
and people like that, actually our friend Nigel, who is the editor-in-chief for Jazz in Europe, that's actually from our interview, that's how I ended up being with Jazz in Europe. And the first interview, and I'm thinking like, they're going to start me off easy. The first interview was with Bobby Santabria, who's a 10-time Grammy nominated guy. It was like known as a jazz historian. And I'm like, holy shit. And like, I did my research, but where do you start with guys like that? Or Dexter Gordon? I mean, it's so much history.
Yeah, and you can't blag it. That's the thing. It's like, you can't blag it.
Yeah.
So I was a bit nervous, but she said, we'll meet in this cafe. So it was like something out of a film for me, that kind of, I was wandering down this kind of gorgeous Parisian kind of road, and we went into this gorgeous cafe, and there was noise everywhere. And of course I was recording it on my phone, and then I was worried that you wouldn't be able to hear it. And I'm like, I'm never going to remember this thing. And it turned out that, for her book, she was only accepting interviews from female journalists and African-American journalists, and no one else.
Wow.
Interesting.
And I was the first person to interview her for this new book.
Wow.
Oh, that's great.
So it was this kind of and we've become, I think, friends. I don't want to, but she, we email often. We've done quite a few. She did a book launch in London, and I went and filmed that, and kind of we had dinner, and she has become such a hero to me, and to the extent that every time I write an article, I think, what would Maxine think?
Yeah.
In the back of my head, I think, would Maxine, and it's not an approval thing, but it's like, am I saying what I think Maxine would expect me to say?
Yeah, but she's, the thing is, she's no joke. I mean, she's been around that her whole life. She knows all those guys. She's seen and probably done a million interviews herself. She's seen people have to do that, and that's something that I, as an interviewer, that's something I try to do, is not ask the typical questions that these guys get asked.
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? And that's what I found tricky actually with Steve Gadd, because of course everyone asks the same questions.
Yeah.
And you
what was
don't
it like
want
to
to
play
ask the
with
same
so
question.
and so and so?
Yeah. But I think also with that though, you do kind of have to ask some of those, because if you're reading an article, some people do want to know the answers to those questions. So you can't completely dismiss some of that. So it's a challenge sometimes, isn't it, to come up with that balance of the stuff everyone wants to know, but also you want to delve a bit deeper, or kind of bring something fresh to the table.
Yeah,
it's interesting you say that, because I know a lot of people. I was on an earlier Zoom call and with some saxophonists, and a couple of them, a lot of times in my experience, the last thing they want to do is talk shop. In many instances, they would rather talk about anything other than, like, who was it? It was the Kirk Whalum, the tenor saxophonist.
Yeah.
He says, you can ask me anything, but really the last thing I want to talk about is mouthpieces and reeds and gear. I'll talk about anything else with you, but if you absolutely have to know, okay, but otherwise, let's stay away from this. So how do you find the end to that as the interviewer? How do you find the end to those interesting questions, or those off the beaten path is it something that comes organically, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say it's all planned, but honestly, nothing I do is planned. I'm so fortunate. I mean, I do an awful lot of research, and I think because I still consider myself a very new writer. I've only been doing this 3 years. 4, maybe 4, but anyway, not long. So I still consider myself an incredibly new writer. I'm still learning. I still haven't got a clue what I'm doing. So I do an insane amount of research, and I think with each person I interview, that becomes more in depth. And I also think about it from different angles. I think to start with, it was like, okay, what is the career? What is the music about? Some of the standard stuff. But then it's kind of like, but what are you about? What are you trying to say to other people? What are you trying to communicate? And also
that's the core of it all, right? Beyond the technique, beyond the
so I try wherever possible to delve into that. And I don't have any kind of key questions I ask. I really I go with the flow, but do try and direct it in to get the artist to kind of open up as much as I think they want to, as far as their artistry is concerned. If that makes sense.
Are there? And I would imagine there are some artists that would rather go in one direction than the other, where they want to stick with this, the work as opposed to what led you to the work. Do you find that in some cases?
Yeah, I think I've had a few people that I think were expecting a standard kind of tell us about the album and kind of the standard questions. And you can tell that's what they're prepared for. But then when I steer off into a different avenue, in my experience so far, I'm sure there'll be some that won't go very well. In fact, maybe if we do this in a couple of years' time again, I'll be like, oh my God.
The second time I talked to Steve Gadd, it was
the second time, what an asshole.
That's not true. He's not.
No. But they do sometimes seem surprised, but also I think welcome to that conversation. So I recently interviewed Hypnotic Brass, who I hadn't heard of. There's this great kind of brass ensemble, and there's, oh God, I'm going to get it wrong. There's 7 or 8 of them. They're all brothers. And they come from a traditional kind of jazz standard type of family. But what they do is mix hip hop with jazz. And they've been around quite a while, actually. And I felt a bit ashamed that I hadn't known about them. But I just figured, and it didn't say this anywhere, but I just figured if they've come from this kind of traditional jazz standard family, but they're mixing hip hop, then I bet there's some issues about the jazz police and kind of, well, is this jazz, and hip hop doesn't have, So I was immediately like, I need to get to I need to ask about that. And I did. And then that kind of we had this amazing conversation about what is jazz and, respecting the legacy, but welcoming the new. So I think from a research, I just try and work out what I think the artist might want to say, really, what is actually behind their artistry. And where possible, steer out. I mean, the only time it kind of hasn't worked, or kind of worked but not, was when I interviewed Dee Dee Bridgewater, which was the other one I was kind of like, because she is, again, one of my heroes.
She's intimidating,
And she's she's best friends with Maxine as well, which is interesting. They know each other. A formidable pair. But I interviewed her, and she wanted to talk about a lot of the kind of racist issues around the world. And I won't say them now, because she gave very specific examples of many different issues, down to people, clubs. And it was incredible because, it was this really passionate, quite right to talk about conversation. But I said to Nigel afterwards, I said, look,
you have to kind of decide.
This is amazing, but tell me now, because I don't want to write all this up. Excuse me. I don't want to write all this up and then you go, Fee, I can't print that, which I thought is what would happen. Right. And he said, use your judgment. He said, but I can't, so I couldn't include a lot of the great stuff. And for me, that was a great conversation. I would have loved to, but you have to respect the platform if they don't want to get in, they don't want to engage in, because, and again,
it's tricky, right?
It is, and this is not just the occasional subtle comment. This was full on, and as I say, but she was quite right in everything she said. But it was a dangerous conversation that wasn't my responsibility to make that decision. That was down to kind of, the
editors,
magazine. So on that occasion, it was this great conversation, and I completely, she was opening up about everything, but actually I couldn't use half of it because it was just too much.
But you file away for your own.
Oh, I still got it all. I wrote it all out. It's amazing.
You can save it. You can save it for your book.
Well, and here's the thing. Yeah, and I would have, and this is no disrespect because I completely understand, publications and how they work. I would love to not have that barrier. I would love to actually have any type of conversation with any artist and genuinely just write about everything they said. Yeah. In my dream world, that's what I would like to do. But I do understand that, sometimes you can't.
Yeah, it's tricky because some people are very opinionated, and it's great. Like you're doing the interview and you're thinking, God, this is gold, but I'm probably not going to be able to use everything.
Yeah, the whole way she's saying all these things, and I'm like, oh, I can't print that. I can't print that, but mostly it kind of, I would honestly just go with the flow, and I've just been very lucky with my guests.
You started, well, you have first you have Women in Jazz Media. Tell us a little bit about that. Then you also have some emotional support groups that John wanted to ask you about.
Okay, so Women in Jazz Media, again, classic fee move this, where I just suddenly had an idea and kind of thought, well, let's just go with it. And this was the end of November. And a few women, we were talking about the lack of female journalists and writers. And I looked, and I won't name, but I looked on a magazine. And sometimes you can click on the team and it will show you who they are, like on Jazz in Europe. Yeah. It's got the names, but there was one particular magazine that had pictures. And it had 52 writers. And I was like, wow, I was like, this whole page, 52 writers and pictures of everybody. And I do this, and I don't mean to do it, but I do this. I'm like, where are the women? It's like this whole page. I'm like, no. Oh, there's one, honestly. Sad, yeah. And I don't mean to, but it's an automatic thing. And while there is this inequality and kind of imbalance, I probably will always do that, until I don't have to, if I see a picture that looks right, then you don't question it, So there was, kind of, I think 4 women in total, and there was only 1 black writer. Wow. And I just lost the plot because I see this all the time, but for some reason, and I think with conversations I'd had, I was like, no, do you know what? I've had enough of this. And I was like, but how do we get new writers? It's all very well saying we need more women, are they already out there, but we just don't know about it? Or, do women just not think about it? So all these different questions. So I thought, I'm just going to start a Facebook page. I'll call it Women in Jazz Media. So I set up this Facebook page and then started doing a bit of research. And I thought, okay, well, what is this? What is I want to do? And I thought, well, actually, I want more women to be supported and promoted in jazz media. And under jazz media, obviously, it's not just writers, so photographers, anything under the heading of media. Because again, I could barely find any jazz female photographers. I was like, where are they? What's that about? Presenters, everything. So I thought, well, ideally, I want to support and promote women so that we know the ones that are out there, we know they're there, and they, we shout about them, but also, get some collaboration from publications to kind of go, do you know what? We don't have enough women. We openly would like to have more women. So we've got a gender balance. And I think that's the key thing for me. It's not this massive feminist kind of women need to rule the world.
Yeah, but they should be represented.
I want balance and equality. And there isn't any in the jazz industry. I mean, it's straight white male dominated and has been for so long. Anyway, so I set up this page. And then I thought, well, let me email some kind of publications to see if they'd support. So then I had to come up with a mission statement. It all became, in a great way, kind of very full on and kind of like, because I contacted the Jazz Times and they immediately were like, yes, we're happy to be your official supporter. And awesome. I contacted about 10 publications and they were all like, yes, here's our logo. And it's like, awesome. Okay, so I've had all these amazing organizations, and the page, I think within 3 weeks had 750 likes.
Wow.
And awesome. From a social media point of view, how hard, my artist page took me ages to get that. And this was, so this really showed me that there's a need for it. Yeah. So I'm working on a mentoring scheme and we're doing some podcasts, and there's loads of different plans. Sorry, I could waffle on about that for ages, but yes, that's how that started. I just thought, you know what, let me just set up a page, and suddenly I'm the founder of this new organization. Because the Jazz Journal, which interesting, was one of the publications that I contacted about support, said that they weren't happy to be an official supporter, that they would like to support, but they didn't want to be an official supporter. Then wrote an article about it.
Awesome.
Which is, I think, what helped it. So there's loads I could say about that.
Did you encounter any resistance from publications about
I had, I won't say who it is. One.
Oh, well, come on, tell us.
You don't have to name names.
That's the goal.
Yeah,
come on.
Okay. I have one in fact, the publication I was talking about, interesting enough, that had, a team of 50 writers and only a few women. They said that they'd like to have more women, but they don't, as a magazine, they don't support political movements.
That's funny that would be considered a political movement.
Well, and again, as I do, because I do get feisty, but I'm very in control. So I looked at that email for quite some time and then ranted about it in my head. And then I thought, I'm going to reply tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good plan.
And I do, just like I'm human, so I do get that, but I'm very controlled with it. So I thought, I'm not going to reply. And I sent a kind of professional, but I think to the point reply along the lines of, well, that's very interesting that you consider gender equality a political movement. You may be alone.
Right. How bizarre. Yeah, it's not the 1930s.
And I did put you may be alone. So,
good for you.
But that's the only one, but also for me that highlighted, because of course this is the thing, it's actually the women who are already on board, and this is what's great about this page, is like, look, we're already there, we're ready, we're happy, we want to share, we'll do all that, but actually it's men that we need to engage with, or at least kind of look at why there's not so many women in there. So it's the men that I really want to kind of talk to and engage with. And they've been so incredibly supportive, I have to say, so far.
That's great.
John, you want to ask,
considering they've been the gatekeepers for so long.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
John, you want to ask Fiona about you set up some support groups.
I do. I was, as I was going through your website and looking at stuff, I came across the Insomniac Club, and I saw that it, I don't know if advocate is the right word, but you seem to be a champion of mental health and wellness. Is, considering where we are in the world now and what's going on, is that something that you started to direct towards artists, or was that more of a general, for everyone type of a thing?
I think I've been surrounded by people who have mental health concerns my whole life in various different degrees. And I would say, and obviously most of the people I know are musicians or creatives in somewhere, I would hazard a guess that 70 to 75% of them all suffer from some degree of mental health illness, whether it's mild depression to kind of, to full on severe. And I think a couple of years ago, there was a year before COVID, I knew someone who had committed suicide every month.
Oh, wow.
Like it was every month there was kind of like someone who'd gone, and all the time it was like either didn't even know they were suffering, or it was, I knew they were down. And I'm like, I see that an awful lot. So I'm extremely passionate about trying to help that. But what I'm sick of doing, and again, this is my work in teaching and academia, is, we have to have those discussions, absolutely. But you know what? We also need to take some action. And there was this great survey a few years ago, and Help Musicians UK, which is this really good organization. They did the first ever survey on mental health for musicians.
Oh, wow.
And this had never been done before. And I do realize from a kind of business point of view how you need that data. There needs to be evidence. We all know kind of, in the creative industry that there are well-being issues, and we kind of accept it. So actually having data that goes, no, do you know what? This actually is an issue. And the data came back, and I haven't got the figures on top of my head, but I think it showed that 80% of the UK music workforce suffered from mild to severe depression, for example. Wow. So this was really significant. But then, and this is no disrespect for them, and they are still working on things, you know, a helpline was kind of developed. Brilliant. And it's like, you know, what else can we do?
Where do we go?
Yeah, because it's like, great, we need that. And as I say, absolutely no disrespect, we need these things, but it's not enough, is it? Because here's the thing: if you're at the stage where you are thinking about ending your life, you're not going to go, oh, do you know what? Let me phone up this helpline. It's not, you know. So for me, it's very much about kind of that environment around everybody, that we are genuinely there to support and seeing the signs. And I do this all the time. And some people will tell me I'm wrong to do so, but I don't care. Whoever it is, if I see someone on social media that to me sounds like a comment that worries me, I'll message them, you know, and they may go, you know, yeah, I'm fine. You know, or they might open up, and that's, that has happened, that I've said, look, I don't mean to pry, just, are you okay? Your comment worried me, just want to check you're okay. And sometimes I will then have a whole kind of, history of actually, no, I'm not okay. I'm thinking this. But for me, it's something, and I can't just look at all these things happening and not do anything. So I've been very passionate, and as I say, I've experienced lots of it. So the Insomnia Club, what's really good about that is it's and it's still lots of things kind of working on it, but it's a variety of different resources looking at how we can support mental health, but creatively. So there's music, there's artwork, there's videos, there's helplines, there's kind of, it's looking at a variety of ways rather than here's a document with some mental health facts and here's a spreadsheet. Maybe listening to this playlist might help to get your mind in a better place. And for me, Earth, Wind and Fire, is actual medicine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's actual medicine. Boogie Wonderland is for me. I don't care what is going on in the world, in my life, in anyone. Stick on that, and I don't think anyone would not feel slightly uplifted.
It's so funny that you say that. I feel the same way about Sir Duke. If I hear that song, if I hear that song early in the day, the chances of me having a bad day drop dramatically.
Exactly.
You can't help but feel good.
Exactly. And of course, and everybody has different music tastes, of course, but
could be anything,
it could be anything, but music is so powerful. It literally, I believe, can fix something. And as I say, I'm not saying listen to Earth, Wind and Fire and suddenly you're not going to feel depressed anymore, but in that in that moment when perhaps you're really starting to kind of get that might just actually bring you up a little bit, that actually you're at a manageable state, even for a minute. So I think there's lots of tools out there, and music being a key one, that are not used enough,
So not to cut you off, but I've been thinking about this since I saw it on the site. The idea that, and I think the general public just accepts this, that artists you have to suffer in order to be a great artist. You have to have these existential crises that happen, in order to create that. I think at a certain point, maybe when you're younger and in school, that's kind of romantic and it has a certain appeal. But after a while, you realize that no, that's no way to live. Is that something that whole suffering artist, does that ring true for you, or is that something that you think is a myth?
Oh no, goodness, yeah. And in fact, and I think it was about 10 years ago, I started to write a book, which maybe in many years' time I might finish, which was actually specifically about the link between creativity, genius, and mental health. Because I could probably put a case forward that there is a link, and put a case forward to say that there isn't a link, but it can't be denied that some of the greats, if you like, in all of arts had, were either highly intelligent and, genius level intelligence, but also had kind of, some mental health issues from kind of, small to big. There's a clear connection there. And I find that fascinating. I always analyze myself. And I think as a child, because I don't often talk about this actually, but as a child, I was my IQ was tested because I went to these private schools, and and apparently I was highly intelligent and blah blah blah, all that, and also I had that kind of creative element. And my mum's she was a complete nutter, so complete nutter. So I've quite often looked at myself in this kind of because my IQ technically when I did it as a child was 156, which the description was borderline genius. What is the borderline genius?
Borderline,
but as a child, there's kind of like your parents kind of like you're borderline genius. Well, I don't even know.
Yeah, that's like
that
a lot.
means.
That's a lot to live up to.
I don't even
title.
know. Yeah, and I say they were all mathematicians, but I was the crazy creative one. I was going to be the next Judy Andrews with a bit of Bette Davis and Judy Garland thrown in because my dad's heroes. Because whilst my mum was Judy Andrews in the kind of upper class, posh, respected kind of my dad loved the divas, Bette Davis, Judy Garland, the drama. He was all about kind of that. So I had this kind of insane kind of multitude of influence. Yeah, and I see bits of that in me, because I think I can be many different things. So I can absolutely be the crazy creative, and I'm writing at the moment. So do you know what? I'm not going to bed because I'm writing till 5-6 in the morning, not by choice. It's just I'll go up to bed and I'm like, oh, hang on, there's a bass line. And then I get up and I'll write, So I have that element, but I can also be extremely organized and very disciplined and very on it and very sensible if I need to be. So yes, that whole thing fascinates me. That whole kind of what does that all mean, and where does it all?
Well, you
fit?
see that it's sort of the Charlie Parker story, right? Or even Miles, where they were kind of geniuses, but they were self-destructive, and
Monk or Art Tatum or any of them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because a lot of artists, and I'm sure we all have a litany of people that we know or know of. There's this stigma that maybe it's not so prevalent now, but there seems to be a stigma that artists especially don't want to engage in that kind of help. They don't want to get therapy out of some fear that they're going to lose that spark or lose what makes them special or creative. And that to me has never sat well, particularly among artists. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but
I know.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that there's two things there that I often think about. I think because I do some other work for some qualifications, and in that atmosphere, they're what I would call normal people, in that they're not creatives, and say there's no criticism, but there's someone who leads on engineering, on nuclear engineering, on construction. So there's all these different specialists, and I do the work as the creative music and performing arts specialist, and I know I'm the crazy one to them, right? I'm the crazy kind of performing arts to them, and because what I do, the way I am, the way I connect with things is so very different to what is normal to them. But of course, to me, it's normal. This is, and same with all of us. And I do think part of being a creative, I don't like that term, but you know what I mean. We feel things differently. We absolutely feel things differently. And if you're not a creative, you will never fully understand that. And a chord, you might play a chord, right, just, you 4 or 5 notes, and you feel that to the depth of your very being. Like that chord, you genuinely feel it physically, emotionally, with every bit of your body. It could make you cry. It could make you happy. A chord, and that isn't, other people don't get that. They can go and listen to an album, they can go to the theatre, and they can feel connected, and absolutely they will have emotions, of course. But if you're it's different for us,
right?
We genuinely have different emotional connections to the arts in whatever field it is, and that is what I think adds to kind of the way we think and feel about things, which can go crazy. I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? And I went to see Hiromi, who's one of my, I don't know if you know the amazing She's like another one of my heroes. And I was a huge fan of her, and she came to London, and I was like, oh, and I went with my son, actually, who's also a fan of hers. I cried. I'm sorry. I sat there, I think 2 chords in. I think she played 2 chords, and I just looked at my son, and I was bawling, you know, not because it was amazing to see her, but her playing it was just, you know, we connect with things differently, and it can't really be explained if you're not in that creative field.
Yeah,
it can't be explained if you are.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. But so it is in some ways, and also, you know, I don't like to delve into it too much, because isn't that part of what we do? We don't even know why that chord makes us feel that way. Does it matter? I don't know that it matters. I guess it only matters when it becomes a kind of mental health issue.
Well, I would say too, like a lot of, it's something I just talked to some people about, actually a couple of film directors I just interviewed. But the thing about it is, like, I think with all the music education and the arts education, that's awesome. But sometimes we overanalyze music, we overanalyze the process, and we lose sight of the fact that actually it's supposed to make you feel something. And if it doesn't make you feel something, if it's a film, if it's a record, what are you doing? If it's not moving somebody emotionally, I mean, that's the whole point, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we worry too much. And again, from my work in academia, I see this, and even as a journalist, I see this too much, and I can't stand it, that, you know, the arts, it's about how you feel, you know, and whether it's jazz or Norwegian death metal or whatever, it doesn't matter. You know,
right,
it's true. If it does something for you, then it does something for you. And we shouldn't criticize or necessarily analyze why it does something for you, because that's the nature of the arts, you know. And I think for me, I was thinking about dance a lot, you know, because I trained as a dancer, but too old and unfit really to kind of do it now. But, you know, a movement, like literally you could do this, that the feeling you get, you're just moving an arm, you know, but doing that, you know, a simple arm movement,
it clicks something off in your brain, right?
Yeah. And also just watching it, like if you think about going to see a dance show, what all people are doing is moving their body, but you connect with that for whatever reason. So I worry sometimes that we analyze, if it's good and it does something, then surely that's right.
That's the whole point. It's all about truth and making you feel something, I think. Yes. Yeah, that's the ultimate truth.
Yeah.
Fiona, how can people find you online? I know you're now a social media diva. Like you're kind of everywhere.
In your league.
You're kind of everywhere.
In your league.
Well, you know. So tell us how people can find you, and we're also going to put your links in the podcast description. So.
Thank you. Yes, I'm everywhere. So my website is just fionaross.co.uk, but I'm on. So, and all my links are on there. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think that's those ones. And then Women in Jazz Media, if you want to look at that, is womeninjazzmedia.com. And the links to the Facebook page are there. But yeah, probably the easiest thing is just my name. And actually, if you type in Fiona Ross Jazz on Google, then all my stuff I've been working hard on my SEO. So I come up quite quickly.
Yeah, and you have also some of your articles are, well, actually all your articles are on jazzineurope.com and some the other sites that you're writing for currently.
Yeah, on my site there's a journalism page, and that takes you to the magazines I've written for. So if you go on the journalism, then you click on that, then it'll take you to Jazz in Europe and the new magazine that I'm doing some work with, which is Jazz Quarterly as well. So yes. Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. I you know, when I come and stay at your place, and when I'm in London, we always have great talks, and we have our hour-long Subway sandwich talks.
We do. Thank you. And have I talked? How long have we been? Oh, we've been ages. I'm sorry if I talk too much.
Oh, no. It's great. You have a great story. And actually, I mean, we could keep going on, because there's a lot more that we didn't even touch. And maybe when I
still have a list.
I know. So what I was going to say is when you do your next release, or when your next major project come out, let's talk about doing one again. We'll catch up, because I mean, the thing is, you're actually a world-class interviewer, so it's nice because we're all on an even kill here. We all do this. So that's awesome.
You make me sound all fancy, a world-class interviewer.
Oh well, you are.
It's only me.
Yeah, you have quite a list of people that you've interviewed.
It's pure luck, but thank you.
Well, it's luck meets opportunity meets ingenuity and hard work. So we all know that story, I think.
Sure.
So John, this is our new series here, series 2.
The premiere of season 2. Here we are.
I think we did. I think we did okay.
I think we started off great. I think, and hopefully we haven't been away too long and people will catch us. But I figure if people can wait a year and a half for a season of Game of Thrones, then they can wait a couple of months for us. So, and we're gonna end better than they did too. So this is a good way to start it off.
Yeah,
this is a good way to start it off.
So
it was a pleasure to talk to you. It's so great to meet you virtually.
It's really lovely to meet you too. I think we could have talked for hours. So it's just before you stopped. But yeah,
I'll bring John over to London and we'll do a gig sometime.
Please do.
Yes, please.
No, please, you're always welcome. Please do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fiona. And we'll tag you and get all your information out there. Make sure people can find you. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all you're doing and for inviting me.
Okay, cool.
That does it for this week. Join us again soon for another edition of the Groove Coast. And thanks for listening. And remember, life doesn't have to be serious. It just has to be groovy.